your name. We glorify your name. We lift you up, oh God. Yeah, we magnify your name. We glorify your name. We lift you up, oh God. We extol you, God. Oh, God did it. God did. Oh yes, He did. Oh yes, He did. Everything that happened to me that was good, God did it. God did. Oh yes, He did. Oh yes, He did. He picked me up, turned me out around, placed my feet on solid ground. Everything that happened to me that was good, God did it. God did. Oh yes, He did. Oh yes, He did. Everything that happened to me that was good, my Jesus did it. Oh yes, He did. God did it. I don't know about you, but Jesus did it. My God did it. My Jesus touched me. My Jesus delivered. My Jesus forced a miracle. My Jesus did it. My Jesus did it. He healed the sick. He makes the blind see. My Jesus did it. My Jesus
You all can help me out by looking at your neighbor and saying, neighbor, will the few be you? Will the few be you? And if I had to use a subtopic, are you striving to make it in? You know, about 3 years ago, my boss, he told me about a story, him taking his son to Virginia Tech for his first year of college. And his son went there with the hopes of becoming an engineer. And my boss recalls that on the first day of matriculation, all of the incoming freshmen were summoned to go into this big auditorium. And when they got into the auditorium, he said the dean of the engineering school told all the students to stand up. And he told them, he said, look to the person to your left. He said, look to the person to your right. And he commenced to tell them that statistically only one of them will make it to the end of the semester. Now, for most of the students, and more so for the parents, this was shocking to hear, because these were some of the brightest students in the freshman class. They had the expectations to graduate in 4 years or less, let alone make it through their first semester of college. But here they have the dean telling them that only a third of them would make it. And so he went on to tell them why so many would fail. He said some of them would get to college and lose their focus because no longer did they have mom and dad there to regulate them, to hold them accountable, to make sure that they made it to class. And instead of satisfying their academic requirements, they would be more concerned with satisfying their social requirements by partying and drinking, and they would soon flunk out. And then he said there would be others who will assume that their raw intellect that enabled them to breeze through high school will also carry them through college. But they soon will find out that when they are challenged to a higher degree, they will not know how to respond. They will not know how to apply themselves to overcome. And they too would flunk out. And then he finally spoke about what it would take for the third to make it. He said that they had to go to class every day. And he says whenever they were not in class, they had to be studying. There was no social life. In other words, all of their time and effort would have to be aimed toward one thing, and that thing was advancing to the next class. And then the dean, he closed his comments by reminding the students that their first semester tuition had already been paid, and now it was up to them to decide whether or not the money was spent in vain. In other words, it was up to them to decide whether or not they were going to be in the 1/3. So in an effort to drive home my point, I preface this sermon with this story because I feel that many of us are just like the incoming freshmen. For we have aspirations about our salvation. as they do about their college career. We profess that we look forward to the day when Jesus returns. We look forward to moving on from this life here on earth to a life of eternity in heaven. And we know what? The debt has been paid. And just like the dean, Jesus will challenge us this morning to decide whether or not we're going to do what it takes to be partakers of that gift, to do what it takes to make it in, to do what it takes to be one of the few that would be saved. So as we look at our text, we see Jesus. He's headed toward Jerusalem. And this is the second stage of his great journey to the cross. And as he traveled along, he taught wherever he was. For the text says he went through the cities and villages teaching. You see, it didn't matter whether he was in Farmville or New York City. He kept on doing what God sent him here to do. And the text goes on to say that somewhere along the way, someone asked him point blank, Lord, are there few that be saved? Is that in your book? Now, as we look at the text, it does not tell us why the man asked the question. You know, it could have been a question out of curiosity. You know, a question often discussed amongst the people. You know, sometimes people just want to be in the know. Or perhaps this was a captious question. You remember the Pharisees were always trying to tempt Christ with a design to ensnare him and lessen his reputation. Or the question could have been even one of clarification. You remember the Jews taught that all would be saved just because they were Jews by birth and circumcision. So I don't know why the man asked the question, but I do know that since the question was out in the open, Jesus would now use it as a teachable moment and not direct his response to the question, not direct his response to him that asked the question, but to them, not in the multitude. Work ourselves into heaven, but what Jesus is saying is that salvation would not be gained without a great deal of care and pains or difficulty and diligence. I believe somebody can testify that when they were in the world, it seemed like it was smooth sailing, but as soon as you gave your life to Christ, it looks like all hell broke loose. You were faced with many trials and tribulations. It seemed as though the enemy was always on your track. It seemed as though the enemy was always on your track. You were talked about, you were criticized, you were scandalized, but because you have a holy ambition to strive to love your enemy as yourself, you strive to pray for those that spitefully use you. You strive to trust God in the midst of your battles. You strive to show up at Bible study. You strive to use your time, talent, and treasure to help those in need. In other words, you continue to press towards the mark of the prize of the high calling which is in Christ Jesus.